In the last section, we took a look at the forEach helper. When we call forEach on an array, we provide an iterator function that is ran one time for each element in the array, and the element is passed as an argument. So last example wasn't too bad. We were just console logging something. Let's take this opportunity to amp up the difficulty a little bit. So we're going to work on a little bit more complex example here. I want to create an array of numbers and then sum up all the values of the number in the array. So let's put down some comments to guide us through this process. The first thing that we need to do is create an array of numbers. Next, we're going to create a variable to hold the sum. Next, we will loop over the array, incrementing the sum variable. And finally, we will print the sum variable. Okay, so again, we are going to sum all the numbers of an array, and we're going to do it with the forEach helper instead of a very classic for loop. So let's go through this step by step. Step number one, we'll create our array of numbers. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Just nice and simple. Next, we need to create a variable to hold the sum. So I'll create a variable to hold the sum of 0. And now we're going to need to put together our actual forEach loop. So I'm going to look at numbers, and for each element in the array, I want to run this function. So I'll run this function. It will be called with each element in the array, in this case 5 times over, and I'll receive that argument as just number. So a very common convention is if we have an array named as something kind of like plural, like colors or numbers or computers or something like that, for the inner function, the iterator function, when we receive an individual element in the array, we'll use the singular form of the object. So numbers become number, colors become color, computers become computer, and so on. Now that we're inside the array, we'll increment the sum variable. So let's take sum, and we'll add to it the current number. So sum starts off at 0. We'll add on first 1. The inner function will exit. We'll add on 2. The inner function will exit, and so on. Finally, we can print the sum variable by just writing out sum. And now if I expand the right-hand side, you'll see, yep, sure enough, we got 15, which is the sum of all the numbers in here. One other quick thing that I want to add in is that the inner function here, this iterator function, does not have to be an anonymous function like this. We can declare the function separately and then pass it into forEach. So let's see what that might look like. I'm going to take the inner function here, and I'm just going to delete it entirely. And I'm going to define that iterator function as a separate function. So we'll say function adder. It will be called with a number. And every time it gets called, it will be passed with, it will be called with a individual number. We'll take that number and add it onto our running sum. Now that I've got my function declared separately, I can just pass a reference to the function. And you'll see that I get 15 up here. Take note that I am not doing something like adder and then parentheses after it. So if I do this right here, the result is going to be, I'm going to immediately call adder and then pass the result to forEach, which is not what I want. I want to tell forEach, hey, I want you to run this function at some point in the future for however many elements you have in your array, which is why I'm not going to use the parens here. Okay, so gone through another example of forEach here. Again, for every element in the array, we run the function one time. Let's continue in the next section and talk about where we might use forEach in a real practical environment. Like, when do we actually use this for real applications that we're trying to build? So let's figure that out in the next section.